Shana Tova. Last year at this time, I mentioned the story about Joseph Walker, a veteran who passed away from natural causes in Texas. Joseph served honorably in the United States Air Force during the Vietnam War, but after serving his country, we really don't know much after him. The Central Texas State Veteran Cemetery, the staff, they could not find any family or friends to be present at his funeral, and they unfortunately classified his funeral as an unaccompanied veteran. And this is a funeral service where no loved ones are in attendance when a veteran passes away. Cemetery staff, they couldn't accept laying a veteran to rest who believed in duty to country without anyone in attendance. They needed a minion full of strangers. They made calls, they asked for local media for help. And thank God their tenacity paid off. They got their minion for him. 5,000 people from all demographics of Texas, they put aside their personal desires and showed up for a veteran. 5,000 people fulfilled the Jewish commandment of Uvilat Hamet, accompany those who passed away for burial. 5,000 people showed up so that Joseph Walker was laid to rest as an accompanied veteran. It's not really common for a rabbi to share the same story 2 years in a row. But I decided to share the story with this congregation again because its core principle is so fundamentally Jewish. To show up. It's that simple. Showing up is Jewish. It's the essence of my rabbinate. Showing up allows us to bring joy, to bring compassion and kindness into the world. It's how we get to make a difference. It's how we repair the brokenness in our communities. As we welcome the new year, I find myself compelled to mention another story about a veteran who passed away this April. His name was Lawrence Warner, and he was a member of this congregation who fought in the Battle of the Bulge, the last major German offensive on the Western Front. I learned about Lawrence during his funeral intake. His niece and nephew, Helene Elkis and David Silverstein, both lifelong temple members, they reflected about his kindness and wonderful stories about their uncle. His funeral was held on April 16th at Elmwood. And I remember arriving at Block 36, of course, this is Temple Emanu-El section, where I immediately noticed the color guard, and this is the special group of people who do the military honors during a funeral. Lawrence's surviving wife Beth was there, David and his wife Susan, Helene was also there, well, this time wearing masks, sitting 6 feet apart under the green awning that we typically see, and not allowed to hug or embrace each other. Our rabbis teach us that the just way is always the right way. As I was about to officiate at this funeral, I quickly realized there wasn't anything just about this funeral. There wasn't anything right about his funeral, and all funerals since early March. In other words, we couldn't really show up. Tonight on Erev Rosh Hashanah, I'm still thinking about these injustices of all of these funerals. So many of our members couldn't have a proper funeral intake to reflect about their loved one. They couldn't mourn properly, including the important mitzvah to be with people when we shit Shiva. I'm thinking of the families of Sally Ann Brenner, Saul Yassim, Carol Solomon, Ronald S. Cohen, Preston Edwards, Norma Sorrell, Joseph S. Tanner Sr., Sheila and Paul Klein, Garth Bricker, Sandy Holsey, Margot Kessler-Marks, Harvey Gottlieb, Norris Friedman, Susan Casey, Joe Hagedorn, Harold Apolinsky, Melba Epsman, Corinne Rifkin, Lisa Tudson, Lillian Orbital, Bess S. Bain Cotton, Phyllis Hirsch-Gowen, Martin Harold Nelson, Arnold Singer, Jack McGann, Maria Lind, Julius Goldstein, and Lynn Otis Wilmoth. And I'm thinking of you and those in our community whose worlds have been turned upside down by the Roa Hagzerah, life's harsh decree. And this year we know the pandemic was this decree that nearly killed over 200,000 Americans. This decree completely halted our way of life. This Roa Hagzerah not only canceled our Shiva gatherings, our weddings, and our B'nai Mitzvah celebrations, it caused our businesses and pensions to collapse. It caused surges in anxiety, depression, substance abuse, divorce, hunger, and loneliness. And here we are on Rosh Hashanah, on Yom Kippur, a period where we feel our vulnerability and pain. It's a time when we forgive others and when we can forgive ourselves. It's a time when we get to look ahead for that new start that we desperately need. But it seems the damage of the past 7 months is unrepairable, even as we yearn for a better year ahead. And therefore we ask, how can we hope for a better year when this Roa Hagzerah is still charging at us at full speed? What can help us? What can give us the direction and strength to navigate the greatest challenge that we have faced together as a community and as a country? How can we find justice for those lives lost and destroyed? How can we find justice for those families who were prohibited from visiting a loved one in hospitals or nursing homes while they convalesced? How can we find justice for those who are alone in hospitals and nursing homes during their final moment? I know many of my colleagues tonight are trying to answer these questions during the high holidays. We will look to our liturgy. We will look to our Torah. We will look for inspiring stories about clarity and perspective and hope. But for me, I don't believe the answers that we seek lies in the prayer book or from our traditional Torah reading, which is really about blind faith and absolute loyalty. And though we may like those stories on television that give us hope or perspective, but at the end of the day, I don't know if they give us the courage that will alleviate our depression and especially our loneliness. And I firmly believe, and I want to stress, that the answers are not found in judging the behaviors of others during this pandemic. The answers aren't found specifically in mask shaming, punditry, and speculations about this virus. Those families who had to wait in their car for miles to go to the food bank deserve better than those social media posts that pontificate strict quarantine from people who had no financial or emotional setback. We can say that we are in this together, but tonight on Rosh Hashanah, we must also acknowledge that each of us suffered in our own individual way, unique only to us, where we felt alone and abandoned. Rosh Hashanah, in its simplest and basic definition, means the first of the year. Nevertheless, our great rabbis also teach us that Rosh Hashanah has a deeper and spiritual element behind its name. This is why our rabbis also called Rosh Hashanah Yom HaZikaron, the day of remembrance, because God remembers us in a new year. It is this, the vital importance of remembrance, is how we can actually process the past 7 months and provide justice to those who suffered terribly. Because remembrance is Jewish. It's what keeps their stories, their suffering, their pain, and their agony from being lost into the abyss of forgetfulness. Remembrance is how we learn from our mistakes and strive to create a better and just future. Remembrance is in our Jewish DNA. I'm often reminded by the architects who masterfully designed Yad Vashem, Israel's Holocaust Memorial and Education Center located in Western Jerusalem. And they strategically engraved the words from the Baal Shem Tov, who is considered the father of Hasidic Judaism, at the main entrance before visitors can enter, so that they can immediately begin to reflect as to why they're here. Forgetfulness leads to exile, while remembrance is the secret of our redemption. The architects at Yad Vashem understood that remembrance is the spiritual ingredient that ensures that current and future generations will remember the Holocaust. God willing, our scientists will develop a vaccine at the end of the year. A vaccine will bring a return to normalcy, which we all need and deserve. But normalcy often leads to complacency. We know this. Complacency is how 7 months of sadness and pain becomes a lost, distant memory. Therefore, on this Yom HaZikaron, this day of remembrance, we are obligated to remember the thousands of victims who passed away from COVID-19, medical professionals and first responders who worked endless hours attending to the infirmed. Many of these medical heroes are members of this temple family. The grocery store employee who not only worked, but worked overtime to restock our shelves, who risked exposure daily. Those who lost their jobs, their careers, and their life savings. African American deaths from the coronavirus are 2 times greater than the rest of our population. The rising levels of anxiety, depression, substance abuse because of life-altering restrictions and lockdowns. 1/4 of young adults have contemplated suicide during this time. Patients who were forced to cancel elective procedures, cancer screening, and treatments. The National Cancer Institute warned that this pandemic could reverse 20 years in improved cancer mortality. Those working parents who cannot afford the rise in childcare costs. The children with special education needs who are at significant risk of academic regression because of routine interruption and the limitations of online learning, and those students in poverty who simply don't have any access to internet. Child abuse and neglect reports dropped significantly during this time because teachers weren't there to protect their children. Those seniors who are alone, isolated in their homes or in retirement communities without any face-to-face interaction. And our temple families who couldn't have the right to have a proper funeral and a period of Shiva. We remember this on Yom HaZikaron, the day of remembrance. Our stories and our suffering will not be lost. Our remembrance is how we will embrace and comfort each other. The Battle of the Bulge was the largest and bloodiest battle during World War II, where American forces incurred the highest casualties in any operation. The Battle of the Bulge, it challenged troop morale, tested military strategy, and strength to hold the lines by an onslaught of German surprise attacks. During the battle, our soldiers fought in an average temperature of 20 degrees and 8 inches of snow. Though the Germans showed initial success to recapture Western lines and supply routes, the spirit, the courage, and the tenacity of our U.S. soldiers prevailed and headed to Berlin. In 5 months, good defeated evil. Lawrence Warner was in this battle. He was in the trenches for all of us. May his memory forever be a blessing. And may all the loved ones from our Temple Emanu-El family lost during this time, may their memories forever be a blessing. May God comfort and sustain all of the mourners. We know our battle with the Roa Hagzerah, the harsh decree of the coronavirus, isn't over. But our rabbis remind us the Roa Hagzerah, though difficult, painful, and out of our control, doesn't need to define us. Viktor Frankl, the Holocaust survivor and physician, taught us when we are not able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. We change ourselves by remembering the stories and the suffering. This is justice. This is what being a Jew is all about. God willing, much sooner than later, we will be sitting together in the pews, kibitzing about life, and knowing this community, football. And when we welcome Rosh Hashanah next year, God willing, we'll be shaking hands, hugging, and embracing one another. But all of us will remember that Rosh Hashanah is also called Yom HaZikaron, the day that reminds us that remembrance is how we change ourselves and the world. Shana Tova to our temple family. Although we cannot see any of your faces, I know you can see us. Good Yom Tov.